A couple months ago, I was introduced to a guy named Caden Damiano. He's the president of the UVU UX Club, and after exchanging a couple messages, he asked me if I wouldn't mind collaborating on a podcast of their own at the UX Club called Pivot. I was then introduced to his partner, Cam Sackett, and the two of them came up to my house for a little collaboration podcast about the skills that it takes to land your first job out of school and some of the things that they're learning. It's a great opportunity for me to get into the minds of these students who are graduating with UX design experience and looking to get their first job. It was a great conversation, so you got something to look forward to today. Let's go ahead and get started. This is another episode of Design Today in collaboration with the Pivot Podcast. Here we go.
So just tell us about your background and when you decided to pivot into design.
Yeah, that's actually a good question because I did not come from a formal design background. I was a marketing major. And even before getting too far into the degree, I always thought that like business, entrepreneurship, like that was my thing. I really enjoyed the marketing, the advertising. And so that's why I went into marketing. And it was actually by circumstance that at a small startup, we needed some design help. And I always had an interest in design and started on it a little bit and slowly got my feet more and more wet in the design world.
So what did you study in school? Did you do marketing and business? And then...
Yeah, so I got about 3 years into my marketing degree before I realized that I really have a passion for design. By the time I was at that point, I also had gotten married. I had been working full-time at an internet marketing agency and started doing the design thing. So my senior year, I then switched my minor and I did a minor in web and graphic design. Okay, cool. So kind of kickstarted that, did about a year focus of just the art side of things, and then finished up the remainder of my business stuff. But yeah, that's kind of where it all started as far as education goes in design.
I think most of the people we've talked to, everyone comes from a different background. Like I come from architecture and linguistics. Caden's coming from, where did you start again?
So I'm kind of like pretty eclectic myself. It's like I just want to learn everything. Yeah. Like I want to see how everything works. So I've learned like digital marketing, business. Originally, like back in high school, like I was just really big on videography and stuff, just because I thought like how you design the scene and how you cut the scenes and everything like that would elicit a certain emotion. I just fell in love with like media, period, how you could influence people for better or for worse just using like media. And then then I just saw like Iron Man, like the first Iron Man, and ever since then I was just like, I want to do a job where you can just make cool stuff. Mm-hmm. And back then, like UX design wasn't like a clear career path.
Totally.
And you had to be an engineer, and I wasn't like super amazing at math. So I just thought, well, I could control videos. But now it's pretty like established that you could design those futuristic, like the future of technology, without having to be like engineering or anything like that. So that's just kind of how I got here, the eclectic way.
Did you find that I just had an interview that I was talking with someone at a lunch meetup here, and she was an anthropologist, and I just find it interesting that every time we come from these backgrounds, but we all kind of have the same, or at least this is my perception, that we all have the same thing, that we want to solve problems, or it always kind of we just couldn't find that job that was that. Yep. Did you have that similar thing? Was that kind of your driving force?
And the thing that always scared me, in fact, I think I've actually talked to you about this. The thing that always scared me is like, I don't think design's my thing because I'm not a good artist, and I can't be an artist in this world that I thought this world was. And so that's why I stuck to more of the business thing, because I was going, that's actually more my passion. I like the problem solving as it relates to business, but again, the further I got into it, the further I realized you didn't have to be an artist to be an experienced designer.
Right.
Yeah, it's perpetual self-loathing when I actually get into sketch. Like I get through discovery phase and everything, and then it's like, okay, time to actually like, hit the pavement, actually start making stuff from nothing. Yeah, well, not technically nothing. Like, you have some insights, but you're like, how do I represent this
Sure,
visually? And you just hate yourself the whole time. It's just the worst, because I'm not very, like, artistic either, like, graphic design wise.
Do you think so? A debate that I find myself observing a lot in the industry is people saying, everyone's trying to still define product design. Well, for UX design, shifting more to product design, but everyone's trying to throw this definition on it, and some people emphasize more like the research part of it. Some people emphasize more the visual part of it. I personally believe you need both. What's your opinion, or what have you seen in your interacting with other industry leaders?
As far as
what people are focusing on,
again, it's a big umbrella as far as everything that it can cover. I like being well versed in the areas, but as far as like specializing, the user research piece isn't a specialty of mine by any stretch. A lot of the times I've worked with research specific teams.
Cool.
And I enjoy that because, there is a craft to that. There's a craft to interviewing. There's a craft to, not leading people into a direction that you're purposely trying to get them to go down. I mean, and that's a difficult thing. And I think most people, product managers, designers, I think people are aware that they don't want to do those things in interviews, but they still inadvertently do it, right? And so there's a craft that goes to user research that I'm aware of, and I just go, that's not my specialty. And I think that sits well with me. It doesn't bother me by any stretch. Let people do what they do well. Yeah. And you could get into the other stuff about like, copy, for example. That's part of the experience that I'm not the best copywriter. I can take a stab at it, but there's people that are better than me, and I'm okay with that too. So the thing that I enjoy most about the work that I do is being able to see the bigger picture, being able to see how everything's going to interplay with each other, see the architecture of the whole thing, right. And then really get into individual personas and problems and figure out the experience based upon that.
Cool. So in your opinion, because I think some of what some students and just talking with other people that have struggled with is you'll go to interview for one job that's listed as a product designer or UX designer, and you go to another one and the expectations are vastly different, right? Whereas even ourselves, I may specialize in certain areas, and Caden's way better at certain areas than I am. So what do you think the future of formal education is?
So that was one of the questions I was going, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that.
Yeah.
It's such an early phase still. And I think part of the reason that you get so many different job interview postings with different expectations is because people don't really know what it is yet. And sometimes I can't remember how many times I've had somebody say, I went in for this UX position and they wanted me to be prototyping, developing as well. And I'm going, okay.
Like getting in the code.
Yeah. And then they get into it and they say like, here's a UX position, but it was nothing more than graphic design. Right. I think people catch this trendy term of UX and everyone's job postings just turned from graphic designer to UI designer to UX designer, but the expectations requirements are all the same. It's such a new thing that everyone's still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's almost kind of scary for like us because you spend a lot of time looking for jobs and like interviewing and stuff. And some of them were just bum like duds where you just get in the interview and you're just like, no, I just took an hour to drive up here. Or like I blocked out my calendar for this. And they're like, do you do wireframes? Like they're just so like caught up on like the tactics, I guess. And then when you get into the job, I bet they don't want you to take any time doing discovery. They don't like value like the research. So they just want you coming up with solutions that are not informed at all. And so it might be like look like a real position where they have these requirements like, oh, you gotta do prototypes and wireframes and do user research, whatever that means to that company. Right. And because like for example, like I hear from some companies it's like move fast and like make stuff. And then at Family Search where I work, we take like a lot of time on like really fleshing out the problem before we send it to like development. And they take a ton of time, like just in a meeting I was in today. We thought we had a deadline, and then the big PM over all the PMs PM Supreme, I guess. But he was just like, there's no deadline. Like, we haven't thought through this problem yet. And it takes, I don't know, just some companies it takes a while. I don't know. I guess maybe you just have to be like open for whatever happens.
Well, I think we've talked about like you have agency type work, which is more fast paced because you're working with clients, and then you have more internal work where you're working on the individual product of the company. I think that we've talked about how that influence, but I think there's still like, I mean, yeah, it's all still up in the air, but I think from coming off from our perspective, right, we're finding these jobs where sometimes, and we don't say this in like an arrogant way, but like sometimes we'll be like, whoa, like I'm just as qualified as maybe this junior senior designer, but because of their perspective on me of where I'm coming from, I can't get there. Or then you come in this thing where like, oh, well, I'm not even qualified for that because they're asking for something that's not even. So I think it's just everyone's kind of struggling with, at least for entry level people, it's like, well, how do we set ourselves apart if you don't have something defined?
Right.
How do you?
And I think just as much as you guys are trying to figure out, I think companies are still trying to figure out. You talked about an agency, but if you look at a startup to an enterprise, they're still trying to figure out. And the design process is different depending on those two situations. It will also be different if your executives come from a design background or a business background or an old school traditional background. Like all these different things will play into how these companies see the design process. And I've yet to go into any company and see that they have this ideal design process that we teach in school or you read on blogs. Like I've never yet seen any one company do it the exact same way.
Right.
And I think everyone's still trying to figure out how to fit it to what it is that they do. There's a lot of people at play. There's politics at play. There's so many different variables at it that each company needs to figure out what it means to them. And I think as somebody new to a company or new to a job or new to an internship, they need to not necessarily hold on to what it was they learned in school, but learn to how to adapt those things that they learned in school to what it now is at this company. Right. And when you leave that company and you go to the next, the same thing. Now learn to adapt what you learned in school to how it's going to play out at this company. I think that's probably because I see so many guys getting spun out of shape going, well, I'm so angry that we don't do this. And I was like, no, we don't do it like that. But if you'd like to get it done, something along those lines, we can try it. There's nobody stopping you from doing it. It's just traditionally hasn't been done because traditionally nobody knows how to do it yet. It's so new.
Yeah. I was reading this like old like 80s book, like human-centered system design is like this classic Don Norman, like really old book, maybe when you're still like at Apple. And it, like in the preface of the book, it's just a collection of essays. And they're like, we're just borrowing heavily from architecture because this hasn't been done before. And they have like pretty much like all the UX principles like they still talk about is like the hot new stuff right today. They talked about back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like these are like just true principles of like what makes a computer system usable. And I wonder if the reason we can't define what product design is because it's still kind of an art. Like we're an engineering centric organizations like tech companies, and we're trying to quantify everything. Like everything has to fit in a KPI or an analytic, but there's just this nebulous, conceptual stuff that really can't be measured, and it also can't be like fit into a Gantt chart either. Like you can't like call creativity on demand, even if people say they can. And so maybe, like you said, just being a product designer is someone that has a core skill set, but essentially you're a professional critical thinker. And then you have these tools that you can use, but there's no like set way to do it. Yep. So you're just kind of like, okay, well, I really want to like validate. It's kind of like what scientists do in the real world. They design experiments to validate something, and they don't always like do the same thing. Yep. There's no way to like experiment everything. They have to get creative and make up stuff to experiment things.
Yep. I wonder though, like if you've experienced when you're hiring people or interviewing candidates, how people are branding themselves, and if that matters. I know it matters, but if it matters to the specific company? Because like one designer might say, "Oh, I'm a problem solver." Or one might say, I do visuals that help people, blah blah blah, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, for like Domo, for example, what are the type of designers that you would look for in your case?
Yeah, I don't know if as it relates to Domo, if it's something necessarily that Domo's looking for, but more of what I look for. I think is the opportunity that they've provided me is that they leave it up to me to figure it out. So I've got a couple of things that I look for.
Yeah, what are like one, 2 or 3 things that you look for in a designer?
We talked about practice that one time.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking specifically like what I want to see in a portfolio, or what I want to see in a person?
Like, it's been interesting, like talking with other people and other industry leaders that we've been interviewing, and we have been asking this similar question, and it'll be interesting, I think, after we've gathered a few to see what if there's a common trend,
or there's no overlap,
or
but
see, I think that's probably more accurate.
Yeah,
is because a lot of this stuff we can almost overcomplicate, and at the end of the day, we're just trying to solve problems for people. And like, if you dumb it down to the most foundational piece, that's it. So in the process of solving problems for people, what is it that I'm going to look for in somebody that I enjoy working with? It's such a personal thing. And so I think it could be different from person to person, unless maybe there is a trend, which I too would be interested in.
What do you think? That's an interesting question though, because I mean, there is culture fit, and obviously the people you work with is really important. So you have productive teams, right?
Yep.
But like, do you feel like there needs to be some form of standardization where there is this mark? Because you know what I mean?
I don't know. Like,
or that doesn't does that matter?
Well,
like, if I say I'm a problem solver, how do you quantify who's a good problem solver?
See, that kind of stuff like cracks. I was just reading an article yesterday that was just saying like, drop your tagline on your website that says you're a problem solver, or you're a
I love
critical
human-centered design principles, or I don't know.
I like the human-centered
the
one.
Yeah, the Squarespace stock things. Yeah.
I get it. I mean, you got to do what you got to do to try and brand yourself and to try and get your personality across. And I'm all for that. I love to see individuality. I love to see personality. The gimmicky stuff that, I'm a critical thinker, I'm a problem solver, or, that kind of stuff, like, it's just fluff and I'm going to scroll right past it. But really the thing that I look for, I think that you're hitting on this, like, what is it that I look for in an intern or I look for in a hire, actually has very little to do with hard skills, and it comes back to like the soft skills. Hard skills of like, he knows how to work in Sketch, or he knows InVision Studio, or he knows Framer or Figma, or hardware is going to change. He's got one way of doing wireframing, he's got a different way. Like, all that hard skill stuff is still, there's not one way of doing it.
Right.
So I'm not interested in that as much as, okay, I can see by your portfolio, you know how to go through the process. Great. That's checked off the list. But when I was interviewing, 30 some candidates for a job position at Domo, 25 of them checked that box. So now what do I look at? And it was interesting because after getting everyone's resumes, getting everyone's portfolios, on paper, everyone almost looks identical. They've got a handful of projects that they've done at school. They may have done a freelance project here or there, and that's about it. And now they're trying to get their first internship. Their work that they put in their portfolio almost looks identical, right? It almost looks like anything else you'll see on Dribbble. And your wireframes look like the next person's wireframe. So like, all I get from that is, what the process is. Great. And so I look for the intangible pieces, the soft skills. And the ones that really actually stick out to me are an individual's ability to be teachable, to understand their opinion, to be able to back that opinion, articulate that opinion, but then be able to take others' opinions and reformulate their own opinion. Because at the end of the day, it's not the designer's opinion of what's right or wrong. You're kind of at the crossroads or the intersection of all different forms of input. And so can you take all that input and can you turn that into something? Your ability to be wrong, or your willingness to admit that here was my hypothesis and I was dead wrong, and now I'm going in this. Like, that actually means more to me than anything else.
So showing in our case studies, showing where you failed.
I saw one portfolio, maybe two, in that process that showed, like, here's what we set out to do, and here's the problems that we thought we were addressing, this, and this, and we were wrong. And we then did this, and this, awesome. And we were still wrong. And we did it like that is what actually I go, I am so much more happy that you recognize you were wrong 3 different times than saying that I heard this problem, we did this, and they liked it.
Yeah.
That's not how it always goes.
And just because the stakeholder likes it doesn't mean it's the right solution.
There's hundreds of right answers, right?
Yeah.
And so the ability for one to say, like, we're wrong here and we're switching, and it's not a reflection on you as a designer or you as a person or anything like that. It's just part of the process. That stuff, like, stands out to me more than anything. There's other personality things. I'll share another quick story. I was interviewing 2 design candidates who were friends at the same time, and
like in the same like what we're doing right
now. It was at a lunch thing.
Okay.
And they were both interested in the internship. As they were asking questions, they were kind of there. It was my first opportunity to meet them, hear about them, and it wasn't a real interview, but it was.
You're vetting them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At the end of our little discussion, they both sent me emails. They both sent me their portfolios. One of them said, I really appreciate the things that you said. I really think I could fulfill that job position. I'm really eager and hungry to do it. The other one said, I appreciate your time that you've taken. You've got a hard decision you make. If you pick the other guy, you've made a great decision. He's a great guy. I've worked with him in the past. He'd be more than capable. I'm not saying I wouldn't like this position. I would, but in either position, you've got a great option. That stood out to me so much more than anything else. Is like the humility in that.
Yeah.
And that's what I look for in somebody that I want to collaborate with, is somebody who's going to be humble and teachable and not so stuck in their ways, or put their stakes in the ground so soon. Like, those types of things are the soft skills that really mean so much more to me than the hard skills.
Yeah, strong opinions, loosely held.
Yeah.
Like, it's now, like, I'm really thinking that, like, UX design is, like, coming back to, like, an art form, because people have been trying to, like, standardize it and, like, make like these kind of concrete, like, this is what you do as a UX designer. And based off just my experience, it is, you're essentially just wrong all the time. And
even if you have research.
yeah, even if you've done research, because
you can be wrong.
Yeah, it's even harder when you're doing, like, international users and you don't even know how they think.
You don't know their culture. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
It's completely different.
Yeah, like, I've been doing crash course on, like, Chinese culture for last summer, like, because I'm working on, like, Chinese stuff. I can't even, like, read Chinese, and, like, I still can't comprehend, even if, like, I get, like, in words like, okay, well, they think this way because this, and I just emotionally doesn't, like, resonate with me. So it's like the only thing you can do is just test stuff out at that point. I think it's just, there's no, like, heroes in UX design. It's just people that are just gritty enough to just keep, like, making solutions.
Well, I think that's a good thing, though.
Yeah,
good design means that you're not being, like, it didn't show, like, you
then it's
right?
not a deliverables game. Then
yeah.
it's a results game. Like, you don't stop until either the company runs out of money or the user's happy. Like,
yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about going on this, like, we don't know, right? We don't know everything, but the importance is to get to the real problem, live within the problem, and figure it out. And you're never really done, right? And you mentioned the thing that kind of stands out in portfolios or people you talk to is when they're the humility, or when they admit their mistakes and they try again, So do you have an example of yourself where you failed in something and then you bounced back, or you were doing a design and it didn't quite work out?
Every day.
Yeah.
I mean,
case in point.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you have maybe a specific example that you can share.
Yeah, there's a handful of them, but let me just speak to one real quick that I think a lot of new designers may struggle with, or at least I've picked up on seeing people struggle with. And I myself struggled with it. And I recognized this as I came to Dome when I started working. I mean, Dome's product team is 200 some people. It's the largest product team I've ever worked with. You've got a lot of directors, a lot of really smart people, a lot of really great designers. And trying to find my place in that was new to me. I had jumped from a lot of different startups where everything was much smaller, where we could pivot a lot easier.
Nice.
Thank you.
Plug. Yep. And one of the things I was very self-conscious of is my ability to output right answers going to be how they're valuing what I'm doing for the company. And I found that through the course of those first couple months that we would find ourselves in so many scenarios where we're wrong here, we're wrong here, we're wrong here, and we just keep pumping out these answers. We keep trying and testing and iterating, and it's some things got right here, but then this was wrong, and we kept going through that process. And I'm going like, man, my personal win-loss record is pitiful, and I'm concerned that they're going to see my win-loss record and be like, pitiful win-loss record. He's a poor player. And what I learned was actually the opposite. And I'm not saying that arrogantly, but I'm saying from the directors who I report to and work with, their perception is he's learning at every opportunity, and he's not stopping. And he's working with people well. He's collaborating well. He's understanding the problem. He's empathizing with the executives. Like all these things, there is what they're looking at. So the output of the wrong answer at the end of the day wasn't necessarily what what the grading factor was, but my ability just to keep going and keep going. And I think a lot of new designers get caught up in like this. Developers got a question, they come over and they ask me, and I better rattle off a good answer right now. And they shoot something off, but who's to say that was the right answer? And a lot of times you go, the developer's opinion would have been just as valuable as your opinion. Neither of you have gone out and done any research. So at this point in time, your opinion, their opinion, what's the difference?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's as much as do you have an answer on hand? I like to see the guy who goes like, I appreciate the question. Give me some time. I'll dig into it and I'll come back to you with an answer.
Totally.
That is so much more mature in design thinking than, hey, I've got a question for you. Well, here's the answer. Like, we don't have to be the gurus of every answer.
Yeah, we don't know everything.
Well, like some of the most experienced designers I've met, like during like my internship, the most like sage guys everyone goes to, they're usually like their answer is like, is this the right solution? I don't know. Like they just say I don't know a lot.
Yep.
Just because they're like
They'll
they'll
where you just like stand by the window and be like,
yeah, they like white.
It's like your
they well no they this one time this guy just straight up like whiteboarded this diagram like pretty much fleshing out the entire problem, every like variable, and at the end of it he's like, so we can either do it this way or that way. Which one's the right one? I don't know. Like so that was 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's such a mature thought process because I mean the opportunity to say like, I mean I like that you said I don't know, because I've said that so many times, and I know that some of the interns would look at me and be like, dude, you don't know the answer to a lot of these questions. And I'm like, I don't need to know the answer to a lot of these questions. We'll figure them out. We're problem solvers, so let's solve the problem. But off the cuffs, you know just as well as I know, and neither of us know. So
totally.
Let's just keep working on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Well, I just really like that. And then because I think we kind of grow up in a culture, and especially like a lot of newbies are coming out of like a traditional education, or like they like if you don't do something right, like you fail.
Yeah.
If you collaborate, you're cheating. Like so like you've always been told like you're always like aiming for coming up with the right answer, or you don't get that validation. And so it's almost rewiring. It's not about winning or losing or who's right or anything like that. It's an infinite game. Like just people getting frustrated that their solution isn't being picked, and they're like, okay, fine, well maybe he wins. And I'm like, it's not about winning or losing. It's
yeah, that's super interesting. It's like because I started on architecture, and I learned in the program you learn really fast to like get over yourself.
Yeah.
And like, it's not about you, it's about the product or the solution or whatever. But I find that like that comedy really interesting, where I think, would you say that's a key, is once people discover like, to get over, it's not my art project, it's not my deliverable, it's not my solution, it's
not a reflection on you either.
Right.
Like your work doesn't define you.
Like, be comfortable with failing, be comfortable with the feedback.
Yeah. I mean, you're still a person, still prone to make mistakes like anybody else who you're working with. And so all that is going to matter at the end of the day is, can you work through it? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Man, this is actually really insightful. This is what a product designer is. I'm just going to stake the claim. Like, you're just a professional problem solver. There's some tools you could use, but mostly it's just perpetually not knowing enough and like thinking you have a solution, then you pull a thread and then it like unravels everything and you're like, oh shoot, I didn't consider this. And then you show it to someone else for feedback and they're like, have you considered this? No, obviously not. Like,
the only thing that I'm going to push on, though, is that I think it may make that a little bit too loose, is to that point, everyone in product should then do that.
Yeah.
Everyone in product, just because you have a UX design title, product manager should be a professional problem solver.
Yeah.
If you could get developers to be professional problem solvers, I mean, why not? Mm-hmm. So I don't think UX has got the
monopoly
foothold or the monopoly on like, I am the problem solver, this is my process. Not everyone can do that.
Okay.
I think we've got the unique opportunity as designers to recognize the design process, teach that design process to allow everyone to be a part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with that.
I mean, you look at like what Airbnb has done, and their executive comes from this design background, right? And now they've just they have ingrained that design process throughout their entire company. So everyone's a critical thinker. And so you look at that company and then look at those UX designers and go, okay, now what are those guys? Mm-hmm. Now you get more into like, okay, so there is a visual aspect to it. And that's okay. Because if you're a developer, you've got a development aspect to what you do. And if you're a product manager, you've got more of a management aspect to this critical thinking. And it's not a product manager to designer to developer. There's such interplay between all of it. And I think everyone can be creative thinkers.
Yeah,
I think everyone can be problem solvers.
So I guess that kind of goes back and begs the question, though. So when, if I'm an anthropologist and I say, well, I'm now an anthropologist, designer, I'm an architecture, and a designer, I'm a linguist, and a designer, I'm a business guy.
I have a marketing background.
So is this, designer, like, titles don't matter. I get that.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah,
I understand that. But in the process of applying to jobs, there is this traditional track that you have to go through, and people are looking for these certain things. So I think.
So let me just say this then: give yourself whatever title gets you the job,
and then just go do some marketing problems.
Because the truth of the matter is like I said, what we're doing today in the UX industry is not different than what they were doing 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They just called it something different.
Right.
At that point in time, it was like graphic designers weren't just doing the graphic design. They were still problem solving. They're still critical thinking. And the whole idea of user experience design didn't stem out of 2016. You look at companies that have been doing it for forever.
Totally.
And so titles, man, just here's something interesting. At the startups that I was at, I always had the title of creative director. Okay, well, when you're the creative director at a company of 8, it means absolutely jack crap.
What does it mean?
And I am so aware of it. I did not hold that title. But if I keep creative director on my resume, then I'm going to get passed right over because they're not looking for a creative director at Domo. They're not looking for a creative director at Ancestry or any other larger company, right? So what's going to get me a job? I switched all my titles to lead designer, something like that. And so many more profile views and so many more opportunities to engage with new companies just because I changed the title. Guess what? I didn't do anything different. Right. It was just a title change.
Like you were doing the same activities.
Exactly.
And you were exploring the same problem.
Product designer, UX designer, I don't give a crap.
I don't think it's important. The title is meaningless. It's what you do, but I guess I'm just trying to get to a categorization because you are interacting with people who don't think that way, right? Mm-hmm. They look at your do you get what I'm saying?
So that's where I think it comes back to those interviews, and you got to figure out, just as much as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them.
Yeah.
And what does this design process look like to you? What does it look like at your company? And what are you expecting me to do? And that's going to help you feel it out a lot more than, well, they asked me to come in here for a UX position, but apparently they don't know what a UX position is. I mean, so many UI designer positions from 3 years ago were UX positions.
Yeah.
And so going into those interviews to feel it out and figure out what it really is that they're looking for, you might drive an hour and realize that's not what I actually want.
Yeah.
At least you learned.
Yeah.
That's true. And it also, I've realized that a lot of like the jobs I've started out with, like if you build relationships with the stakeholders, your job can evolve as you're in the company because they'll see like your strengths and stuff.
100%.
So you could just tailor your job to like what you want to do, and if you're providing value, like it kind of could go the way you want it to, even if it like wasn't like written that way in the job description.
Totally. Yeah, I think like I've experienced that working at. I started a development company, and they had no design whatsoever. And I kind of thought, well, let's push user focus, like let's do focusing on design, let's be design led and kind of push that. It's taken a long time to get there, but like it's been interesting that I've kind of crafted my own little position.
So you made you made your job.
Huh?
You made your job pretty much.
Yeah, and so I wonder if that's just kind of that's it. I mean,
And maybe I'm oversimplifying it like this, but as somebody who's interviewed and somebody who interviews candidates, a lot of the times when you step into the room and begin the interview, I don't remember what the title was. I don't remember what you're here for. I'm interviewing you as a person.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get to know you as a person and your philosophy and your strategy and your thought, and your critical thinking ability. Like, what's the title that we're going to give this? Oh, I don't know. But I'm really in love with what you're doing and what you're saying. And if what you're doing and saying matches with what we're looking for, we've got a fit.
Okay, so like what you're saying is that all the formalities are gone once you go, like you're in the room together. It's more about like, okay, because you're hiring them for like to help with a specific task, like the mobile team. That's what you run, right? So it's like we have this one feature that we're working on, and we have the budget to hire another designer. And I understand the problem. Now I just want to know if I like the person I'm working on it with. And so like when they come in the room, you're just trying to see if like their thinking, how they think and stuff would fit with the problem you're going to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe I'm oversimplifying just because of my career path.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, Caden, what's the difference between you and I as UX designers? Probably not a whole lot. I've just been doing it for a few years longer.
You're just there first.
That's it.
Yeah.
So what? I should be rewarded because I was born first? Because my parents decided to have kids before your parents? Like,
yeah. I was thinking
there's
about
no
that
reward
today.
to that.
Yeah, like when you start having an opinion, there's definitely gonna be like pushback. I was like debating one of our professors about like, why are we doing this class? Not because like I really respect her, but she's just like, how long you been in the industry? And I'm like, well, like, how about we talk about like relative success? Like if we were both 23, like where were you when you were 23 like me? Like what were you doing at 23? I might say like I might be like just as good as you were when you're 23. So like just because you were born first doesn't mean you could just walk all over me and just call the age card and
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, but I think there is something to not age necessarily, but the experience. Like,
was it life experience or experience?
I wouldn't say life experience because that can be pretty relative and subjective. But
yeah.
I would say business experience. Like if he works in the company for 5 years, like obviously, and maybe I've only worked in in the industry for like 2 years. I don't know. Maybe the person with
this is a deep philosophical debate at this point.
But it's funny because like somebody who's worked in the industry for 30 years versus somebody who's worked in the industry for 25 years. Yeah. I'm going to say at that point in time, there's not going to be a ton of difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody who's worked in the industry for 5 years and somebody who's worked in the industry for 1 month, I'm going to say there is a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, there's things you're going to learn. There's things you're going to pick up. But as somebody who's hired those interns with zero professional experience, I don't expect you to know these things.
Yeah.
And with the interns that we did end up hiring at Domo, I hired them because I saw potential and I'm going to push them to learn a few things rather quickly so that when their internship expires, whether they stay at Doma or they move on to somewhere else, they've got a sprint ahead of their peers who they graduated Dev Mountain with, or who are still sitting on LinkedIn trying to find their first internship or whatever it is.
So maybe the difference between me and you is that we might have like the same skill set and we might be just as good at it, but what makes you more valuable is you've been chewing on the problem longer. And so you have a more intricate understanding of like the business's problem.
Or maybe it's just, we talk about practice.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just practice. Maybe I failed more than you.
Yeah. Okay.
There's 100 ways that we could look at this.
Yep.
Maybe I've just sat in a room with the CEOs more often than you have. And, and the things that I learned in that process, I could share with you, and if I could articulate it well enough, you could pick it up and you could learn it like that without having to go through the experience.
Yeah.
And that's as somebody as a mentor who's hiring these interns, I hope to be able to deliver. Because if I've got, and I haven't been doing this very long. This is such a new thing, right? But if I've got a handful of years of experience and I can figure out how to articulate it and teach it to a couple interns, then sure, on paper, you've got 3 months of experience. But as far as like maturity goes or ability to see the bigger picture, you're now ahead of the game because you've picked up on these concepts, you've learned these concepts, and now you're going to keep paying attention to it as you start to practice these concepts.
So kind of going back to the portfolio, what you're looking for in people's portfolios, that humility piece, that they're teachable, moldable, but then also going. I just lost my train of thought.
And if I can interrupt, the teachable piece, I think can come off like I want to hire someone who's teachable because I'm going to make you my mini-me. Like that's not it at all. It's teachable so that you've got your eyes open to learn these concepts without having to make the same mistakes that I've made. Because if you do that, you'll be better than me in a faster amount of time. And ultimately, I think anyone would want that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's beneficial.
I think that's really, on your part, I think that's a really valuable leadership trait. I think good leaders aren't afraid. They want to pass on the skills that they have and their knowledge, but they're not afraid of being, I guess, like supplanted or something. And when you pass that knowledge on, it's not, I don't know, I guess that there's some people that might fear that. And so to me, that's not a good leadership quality.
Well, I could think it's really scary to be like, what if I hire this guy and like whenever I give him criticism, it's like the worst experience. Like he'll like get defensive and stuff, and then we don't get anything done because he's defending his solution.
That is like one of my biggest fears of somebody who hires someone is going like, I'm hiring you to collaborate you, not to be above you, but to collaborate with you. And if I don't feel in an interview that you and I are going to collaborate well, that's it. That's a huge grading criteria. So it's got nothing to do with experience or resumes or titles or anything like that. Teachability, man.
I just think it's super interesting. Like, just the I don't want to say culture fit. I kind of want to get away from the word culture, but just that, I guess, relationship or personality fit is like a really big factor. I can see some students or junior designers finding that discouraging because I can see the argument of like, well, I have the skills, I have the ability to get the work done and all stuff, but maybe the person's introverted or doesn't have and I can see that being really discouraging.
Absolutely.
So how do you address that?
I would say that person wouldn't be happy getting hired into a situation that they're not comfortable in. Regardless if they have the skill set, you still have to find the right fit for you. And I was just looking at someone's infographic that they posted that they interviewed at like 70 some places before they got their job.
I think I read that same one.
Wow.
I can't remember who it was, but that's 70 some places where you didn't fail. You just didn't find the right fit.
Yeah.
And finding the fit, because man, you can get me going on this this soapbox for a while. At the end of the day, work is work. And there's so much more important things in life than what we do from 9 to 5. And so it's not worth, and I know this gets tough because sometimes there's bills to pay and there's pressure and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to find something that you're going to be happy with. So that's why I say it's just as important to interview where you're going as it is that they're interviewing you. You got to be happy 9 to 5. And if you're not, then it's not worth it.
Totally.
And if you're an introvert and yes, you had the skill set for a position, but they were looking for an extrovert, you wouldn't have been happy there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because they would have held you to this expectation, and that's not coming to you naturally. So find the next place.
Actually, like I was just talking with a buddy, and because he just got out of an internship, and he had 2 other interns in his cohort, and one was human computer interaction from like San Diego State or something like that, like University of San Diego, UC San Diego, which is a pretty like prestigious program. And then there's this other guy who's like an architect.
Yeah.
And the architect got hired, and he said that they didn't hire the HCI intern because she like kept to herself and she didn't speak up in meetings and stuff. And like on paper, she's more qualified to like work at that company. But the other guy, he was actually collaborating and working and stuff. And like, just to your point, like that's kind of the X factor, because yeah, you're right. Like 25 of those applicants out of the 30 knew what they were doing skill wise.
Mm-hmm.
But what really, like, it's like in the Olympics, like the only difference between you and the next guy is like milliseconds, you know? So
yeah, I mean that kind of, we could say, we go back to what's the future of formal education, at least in the design field, would be collaborating more in class projects maybe, and
it's almost like there's character development in it.
Right?
yeah.
Social development in this whole process.
Yeah.
I don't think you can learn enough about empathy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we spend so much time learning about how to prototype and how to do all this, but if you can't, you know, I would say deploy empathy, then you're as good as dead, right?
Mm.
You're not going to be a great designer if you just keep going into it thinking you got the answer already.
Right.
Yeah, that makes me think, like, if you make a formal, because you talked about in your video, like, more universities are going to catch up and start, like, making their own formal, like, UX programs. So it's going to get more competitive. So when designing the curriculum, it might be, like, the curriculum encourages collaboration, kind of almost forces it more. I mean, but like,
I mean, at our program, we do a lot of collaboration.
yeah, we do.
I wonder though. I don't know. I don't want to get like super deep here. We just keep on kind of good. Like,
Maybe they should pay us so there's incentive to.
I wonder.
Hear that, UVU?
Because we do collaboration. I would argue that depending on how a student approaches a project, you could turn that into a real. Like, I think you and I would do that. Like, if we get a project, we're not just going to do it just to get the grade. Like, we want to turn it into something we're actually solving.
Usually
problems,
find like
right?
a real client or something.
Yeah. So like, I don't know. I'm wondering if a lot of my problem with I've gone through schooling for a long time, but like my problem is the structure sometimes is where you lose that collaboration, you lose that innovation part, and you kind of miss the point of the whole class, and you're just doing where it's structured, where you just have to get the grade or get it done.
It's just a vanilla project.
Yeah, it's like a waste of my time and my money, and also a waste of developing a better person, right? Or in the field.
Well, and that's the issue with like collaboration in class, is that if you get stuck in a group where you are all of a sudden not collaborating, then what you can do is you can pull out your phone, you can let other people take the wheel, and you can sit back and play a passive role. But that doesn't work in the real world.
Right.
No.
And so you need to figure out these social skills to help you fix poor collaboration. You know, I go back to one of my biggest growing experiences in school was getting stuck in this large group. It was a business startup class that we were doing. And dude, there was this girl in this class who I could not stand. She just belittled everyone, and she was just so condescending, and she just put herself above everyone. And it wasn't in my nature to just be passive and take a back seat, but I did, just because it was so much easier than fighting with her every day. But then we did like this overnight outing where you go up into the mountains, you do like this, you sleep in a yurt, and you do like all this stuff. And it was in the middle of winter, so it was like -5 degrees. We were trekking through the snow. This was up in Idaho.
Yeah, Rexburg.
And you had to be pulling a sled. You had all your gear that you had to pull. And we got into this situation, and she struggled. And as much as I knew going into this that I even told my wife prior to this, I was like, this ain't, you got to kill him with kindness, right? I said, if I'm just going to try to go over the top, helping her in whatever aspect I could. And I learned from that experience more than anything else I've ever learned in a collaboration setting. Because when she started to struggle, I grabbed her pack. And when she couldn't carry any of her stuff, we threw it on the sled and I pushed the sled. And when she couldn't push the sled, I pushed for her. When you get into these situations where all of a sudden you learn to care about somebody, now you've created a more conducive working experience. And all of a sudden you can now collaborate better. And those are the skills that if you don't try to fix that in a collaboration setting, you won't fix it. But that's not the real world.
Yeah.
You could be working with a PM who you don't see eye to eye with. You could be working with developers who are so cut and dry that, they're just a blunt axe every time they say a word, right? You got to figure out how to work through that. And those are social skills.
Totally.
Yeah. Maybe it's not our job to save education. Let's just graduate. It's not our problem anymore. Because that's pretty. I don't know. Like, how do you teach soft skills in a traditional environment where the curriculum's heavily designed by committee, and
I've thought about this though a lot.
Yeah.
Just through my life, not just with the program, but just working with people. I think it's tough, especially when you have maybe a member in the group who's not fully engaged, or
they think that they could just get the piece of paper and be fine.
Yeah. And I think that's hard because there's this part of me that has this I want to help you, but then I've had to learn to kind of balance my empathy, I guess, because it kind of
you'd be too empathetic.
Yeah, I sometimes I can be where I'm worrying about someone else's.
I wanted to pass this class so bad that you forget.
That I forget about myself. I don't know. Is that weird?
No, I don't think it's weird. I think
you're such a great guy.
I think it's an amazing trait for a UX designer. I don't think you can be too empathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it sucks.
But what do you
sometimes
do?
It does suck.
What if you do? And this is going to real work, right? What if you do have a particular team member who is the bottleneck? Would you? I would argue that empathy can only go so far until you do have to make some kind of decision, right? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, who gave me? Is this bottleneck a PM? Is this bottleneck a developer?
Let's say it's
designer.
Let's say you have a bottleneck PM.
Who's just we need to build this. I don't care what the research says. We need to build something by this date.
Dude, this is gonna come off so hokey, but it's a sit down and it's a conversation going. What's going on? And where are your pressures coming from? Where's your stress coming from?
Yeah.
Why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? And let me understand it.
Perfect.
And
soft skills.
I mean,
well, we're just getting back to the human element.
Yeah, this is going to come off as such a hokey podcast.
Yeah, I know. Feel good.
These guys didn't even talk about design. They just talk about being nice to people.
Yeah.
But it's huge.
It is the most important thing, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a people industry that we're in.
Yeah.
We're designing experiences for people. And we can get so caught in the weeds of titles or process or hard skills that we lose the concept of UX design has been going on for years. In fact, I would even argue UX design has been going on since the dawn of man, right?
Yeah.
So it's soft skills then. It's these working with people, deploying empathy that I really think makes great designers.
And what sets you apart from the rest.
So would you? I mean, if you were to say to a person who is interested in design, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to go to this college maybe or this boot camp or whatever," would you say that a qualification for being a designer is that you have to be comfortable working with people? Obviously, but
sure.
What about the peoples that because we talked about how sometimes when you view design, the media feeds you. You have the paintbrush and you're like, yeah, I'm a designer.
Yeah, they have a beard and they're like on a drafting board.
Yeah, but I wonder if it'd be interesting to have a class your first classes, our first class would be can you just a collaboration class?
Sure.
And just develop.
Maybe make the deadline super tight and it forces you to collaborate. I don't know.
You spurred a thought though, because I think one of my favorite UX classes I ever took was in my business program, and it was a consumer behavior class. It was a psychology class.
Yeah, nice.
It was getting into how people think, how people make mental models, how they connect, you know, thought A to thought B. Like that is a people course that, you know, if we're going to add anything to a UX course, I'd love to see consumer behavior become more part of this.
Yeah, I feel like something that's also undervalued is digital anthropology. Like
Oh,
actually
my wife's an anthropologist. I
yeah,
try
like
to get her to
like
fill
beca-
in.
like because like I'll be in like a debate. Sometimes I feel like I'm a professional debater some weeks.
Yeah.
And we're just debating, and I'm just like, well, what if we just take some time and like learn to understand this culture first before we do it? And then someone would say like, well, I don't know how valuable that is. And I'm like, well, like if you don't know how they think, like they're like, we just need to talk to users. I'm like, well, if you don't understand how they think, you're going to ask them the wrong questions that are based off your perspectives and stuff. So I mean, we're running out of time, but yeah.
Well, maybe to end here, I think this has been a really good conversation. If you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently?
Man.
Getting super
like Dawn of Justice, like the Flash, like only has a few seconds to tell Bruce like what to do in the future. Like,
You know, it's funny, but like
and for you, this is not like just curious.
I don't think I would have done anything different.
Yeah.
Because I'm happy where I've gotten to. I'm
Yeah.
happy to learn things that I've learned. There have been times that have sucked. You know, I've been at startups where doors closed. I've worked for CEOs that I felt so undesired or unwanted or unappreciated. I've gone through the whole little fish in a big pond thing. Like there's been so many things that I've gone and learned concepts, and I've struggled, but learning as I've gotten through them has been something that I don't want to go back and say I wish I wouldn't have done that, because learning that I think has made me a better person, maybe a better designer. So I'm appreciative of those things.
If it didn't happen, you wouldn't have known, like you wouldn't have had that wisdom. So
yeah, I think maybe we have one more question for you, but
and it might go on your podcast because we're running out.
That's a good conversation. Is just maybe part of like design evangelism would be that part of, you know, telling people to not be hesitant to go into that job that they may not like, because
it could always turn out good. Yeah,
you might learn something.
Yeah, be teachable.
So just to end here, I guess this is kind of a 2-question. One, like tidbit of advice for our listeners and junior designers or students or just people that are trying to get into the field. What's like, if you could, I know this is like, we hate these questions, right?
And what we talked about the whole hour.
But do you have like maybe just one piece of advice, and then lastly, if you have anything to plug, like a personal project or a book or anything?
No, I mean, again, to summarize some of these thoughts that we've said, be teachable, be humble, understand. If you find yourself in a situation where you're arguing or you're debating or that kind of stuff, take the opportunity to understand the other side, because that's going to break barriers down faster than anything else. I mean, it's a human work that we do, and we lose sight of it when we try and when we overcomplicate things. But if you dumb it down to foundational pieces, this is human-centered design.